Welcome to the High Existence Podcast. I am your host, John Brooks, and today we are going to be speaking to Laura Dawn. Laura is a true visionary. She is the daughter of two entrepreneurs and learned from a very early age that it is actually possible to break through limiting beliefs and manifest the realities that you envision, no matter how crazy they sound to other people. At the age of 15, Laura took her first high dose of psilocybin, and that experience changed everything for her and opened up previously inaccessible dimensions of reality. Today, Laura is a published author, speaker, sacred plant medicine expert, and runs visionary retreats. Her business accolades include growing her first online brand to 1.5 million people on Facebook and using the power of visualization to build a volcanic hot spring retreat from scratch. In this episode, Laura and I discuss what a visionary is. How do we become a visionary? We go into Laura's past and find out how her upbringing from her parents influenced the way she thinks. We talk about how many of us have lost faith in our own inner visionary. We discuss visualization, the nuances of embodying the visionary archetype. There are many traps and pitfalls along the way. We discuss the psychological mechanisms behind visualization, the very important difference between trying versus aligning. We talk about the step-by-step process that Laura went through in creating her retreat center. We talk about Laura's experience and ideas about working with plant medicines like ayahuasca. We talk about intuition, microdosing, spiritual narcissism, seeing psychedelics as a magic pill, a list of Laura's favorite thinkers and authors, and a topic that is actually close to my heart, and that is how we can balance deep inner work and spirituality with outer productivity and work ethic. And I think that for many of us is a tricky balancing act. If you have visions or aspirations or dreams, you have a creative drive, you want to change something in the world or create something epic, this episode will show you how you can begin to make that a reality. Without further ado, Laura Dawn. The first thing I want to talk to you about, I read your about page on your website and the word visionary kept coming up. So I'd like to start there because there's so many different topics that we could go into. What is a visionary to you and why do you associate so much with that archetype?
Well, to me, a visionary is someone who really knows that we create our reality from the inside out and has the courage and the willingness to actually go within and to create a vision, an image from within the inner realms of our own mind that we can really hold to and picture on a daily basis and connect to that vision. And literally from a neuroscience perspective, our mind doesn't know the difference between what we hold in the inner realm of our mind and what we see out there in reality. So the more that we connect to an inner vision of what we want to anchor onto this earth, what we want to call forth, we actually create new neural connections in our mind that literally create a blueprint for us to create it in this 3D reality out there. So it's just going from science to ancient wisdom, as within, so without. And the more that we create an inner vision of what we want to experience in our lives, the more that we actually prime our mind to perceive that reality.
And when you talk about creating an inner vision, is that something that you can learn? Is it something that you've learned, or is it something that came naturally to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. My background, I was born to two entrepreneurs. Both of my parents are entrepreneurs, and I really consider my father to be a visionary. And he used to tell me, there was obviously all sorts of beliefs that were planted in me as a child, but one of them was that whatever I saw in my mind, I could create in reality. And I'm really grateful for that belief. And it takes a lot of courage to really go for what we want in life. And I used to watch my dad just have all these different ideas, and he would really hold such a strong vision, and then he would make it happen. He'd really call forth that vision into reality. And I would say that combined with early training in sports, I was a pretty advanced athlete when I was a child, and I was taught how to visualize. I was a competitive diver, and so there was a lot of teaching around actually going through the motion of a dive before I would perform it in my mind. And there's a lot of research to show the benefits of that. And then I would say, the third big component was starting to work with plant medicines and psychedelics from a fairly young age. I had my first high dose psilocybin experience when I was about 15 years old. And that also really has taught me so much about how to really create my reality from the inside out. And so I would say that was definitely a 3-part of the foundation for what's set me on this path of really embodying the visionary archetype.
When you say what you're saying to me, it sounds almost like so simple. Like if you just really create a strong, compelling vision, and you kind of single-mindedly aim at that, amazing things will happen. It's like, it sounds so simple, but then I actually, in my own life, I don't actually do that much, and now just from this short conversation, I'm thinking, why don't I do that much? Do you find that it's something that's missing from a lot of people you interact with as well? They don't do this?
Oh yeah, and it is simple, and of course there is also a lot to it when we start really diving into what it means to really embody that visionary archetype. But on a very simple level, yes, it's just a matter of really carving out the time, and that's why I really encourage people to embody daily visionary practices that allow us to really hold the inner vision of what we want to create in our lives, rather than just constantly living externally and outward focused, where we're just going with the motions of life, and life is really, chaotic for a lot of people these days, and there's this strong sense of sort of being tossed around by life, that life is happening to us, but the visionary path is that we happen to life, that we actually do have the capacity to co-create our reality and play in this dance, this co-creative dance with the universe. And it's really a fun game to play. And I do encourage people, even if you only have 10 minutes a day to dedicate to this, there's writing exercises, there's visionary practices that you can do in meditation. There's a lot of different fun ways to play with this.
And what's I'm curious what the general principle of this kind of visualization exercise is. Are you instructed to think about like the future that you want, or can you explain like the intention behind it?
Yeah, and it's really a lot to do with the emotional system, of really connecting to the feeling. So when I say, the power to create starts in your mind, led by a resonant frequency of your heart. And so it's the combination of getting into a very coherent mind-heart state where we're actually coming into alignment. It's not just all mental, all mind. It's actually also really focusing on the frequency of how we want to feel. And so, yeah, there are different exercises like, what is your ideal scenario for where you want to be waking up in the morning in 5 years from now or in 3 years from now, and running through that in your mind. Like, I wake up and I'm in my dream bed, king size bed of my dream home, and I look out the window and there's a waterfall, and just like really picturing it and smelling the smells and feeling the sensation of what it is to be there in that moment. And it's whatever it is that you want to create in your life, whether it's, birthing a new business venture or calling in that partnership. But it's actually interesting when we start thinking that we have the capacity to really embody and create whatever emotional experience that we really want. And so that's another component of this creating your reality from the inside out. It's like, do I have to wait to have $1 million to feel abundant? Or what does it feel like to conjure up this feeling of abundance within me right now? I actually have the capacity, and the more I cultivate that capacity to empower myself to feel the feeling of what I want to embody in my life, I'm not trying to strive to get there, and so that's where some of the nuances of really embodying the visionary archetype is, that it's not this constant striving to get from point A to point B. It's actually a deep embodiment of the present moment in the now, and choosing to feel how we want to feel now, and then continuing to align, and by doing that, actually we much more easily align and fall into the vision that we're creating for ourselves within the dimension of our own mind.
How do you think the psychological, maybe you don't think in these terms, but this is how I'm thinking about it. How do you think this works psychologically when people do get into these visualization practices really deeply? Do you think that they just, say for example that I have a vision of being successful in a particular area, and I want to really try and cultivate that emotional abundance now? Do you think then that I kind of normalize that for myself now, and therefore just like slightly make decisions differently that lead to the success that I'm aiming at? Or do you think that I'm just kind of practicing overcoming the obstacles to get to where I want to be? Like, how do you think it works?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that when we look at the true secrets of the universe, Nikola Tesla said so famously that if you want to know the secrets of the universe, you have to understand energy, frequency, and vibration, and that we are vibrational beings. And so when we resonate at an emotional frequency, we do attract that certain vibration. We're sending a signal out into the universe, and that we are attracting that. But that's, might be a little bit more esoteric, but on a more practical level, it's when I feel abundant. If I'm feeling abundant within myself, then yes, I am going to make a different choice in this next moment than if I'm feeling a very strong sense of lack in my life. So it's asking ourselves the question, like, who would I be without this belief of lack? And who am I in this moment, in this feeling of abundance? And what choices do I make differently from this place of abundance rather than from this place of lack? Does that make sense? So it's many different components, and of course there's so many different layers here that we could talk about. But I am a huge believer that we are vibrational beings, and that the frequency that we resonate at sends a signal out into the universe. And on a practical level, it's it's been a huge teaching for me in this, the understanding the subtlety between trying and aligning, like trying to make something happen, pushing and striving, versus aligning and allowing and really opening to divine alignments and what wants to unfold synchronistically without really me having to make any effort at all.
I would love to hear, if you're happy to share, some story from your past where you were able to manifest something that you envisioned.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many stories, but my husband and I, we built a retreat center on the Big Island of Hawaii. And when we started, so much of, and this is why I do talk a lot in this visionary conversation about my relationship to ayahuasca and other sacred plant medicines, because ayahuasca, it's also known as the visionary vine. It really has taught me so much. It's been like a very advanced training ground, teaching me how to really embody the visionary of my life, and teaching me how to really hold such a strong prayer or intention for what I'm calling in, and watching miracles, real true miracles unfold. And when there was this one ceremony where I really held the vision for us even buying a piece of land to get started, and so many miracles unfolded from there. And when we started, we didn't really have a lot financially. My husband and I, we were going through some legal stuff that really kind of drained our resources, but I was really holding a vision that we would create an incredible sanctuary where transformational transformational healing would really transpire on this land. And when we bought the land, we had a huge garage sale to like raise enough money for the down, and we ended up getting a private loan, a private mortgage, and it was hard in the beginning, and it was raw land. So we just we towed our VW van that didn't even run anymore, and we lived out of that for the first year on that land, and with no running water, no power, and it was definitely an amazing experience because we created something from scratch. And in the first year, every day, I was just connecting to the vision of like, this is going to be a place where people are going to have very transformational experiences. I felt it in my body. It's what drove me to work as hard as I did to create this space. And there was a moment where it felt like sort of like a sink or swim moment. We had been working really hard, and I had this huge vision of what I wanted to create. It was like would require hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to create it. And I was just working hard in those beginning days to make enough money for our mortgage payment, really. And so there was this one ceremony where it was one of the first times of having such a profound experience where I tapped into the source of creation. It was real, true alchemy and sorcery at its truest essence. And I held this prayer for a miracle to unfold so that this vision could be realized. And I had built my first online brand to about 1.5 million people on Facebook. And it was kind of just sitting there. It wasn't my main focus anymore. It was a brand building positivity and spreading positivity around the world. And that night, I prayed for a miracle. And I also had this very distinct experience where I felt this blockage, this energetic blockage in my channel of abundance, of receiving. And when we work with these plants and these, we're really learning how to navigate the spirit realm, quantum reality, where it is all about energy and vibration and frequency. And that night, I felt this distinct energy blockage. And it was like I could reach out and tangibly touch it and remove it. And I did. I like cleared the channel. And then that week, the next day, actually, I woke up and I was on my Facebook page and I scrolled down. And once we hit about 500,000 followers, I just got so much spam and like just tons of messages every day. It was impossible to check them. So I never checked those messages anymore. And so that next day, I just woke up and I clicked on the messages and I scrolled down and I just randomly clicked on one. And it was a woman who said, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about buying your brand." And that week, I, had 6 figures in my bank account by the end of the week, and we were able to invest that into the retreat center, and invest it into, finishing our bathhouse and the first couple of bungalows, so that we could have people start coming to have retreats on our land.
Wow, that's incredible. So if you had not checked that message at that particular moment, then it's likely that you would never have connected with that person.
Yep. Yeah, and then just watching so many miracles. And when we bought our land, we didn't know that there was potential to tap into a hot spring. And so that was also another huge prayer that my husband and I love. We love hot springs and water. We just are just so grateful and really hold the prayer that that this water on this planet flows clean and pure and pristine with all the environmental destruction going on. And so we really hold such a strong sense of gratitude for clean water, and we love hot springs. And then we found out that there was a potential for us to drill a well and tap into hot water, and we did. And that was also another incredible miracle that unfolded on that land. And water flowed at 111 degrees with over 400 minerals in it. And wow. we didn't know that was possible when we bought the land. So it was just really listening to that internal guidance system that we all have within us, that the moment I saw that land for the first time, it was just this full body yes, like the channel opened and was like, this is clear. And there was that moment of doubt in my mind and, in Noah's mind of like, how can we do this? We don't have money, or this isn't like, can we even, but it's actually just quieting those fears and those doubts enough enough to just listen to the internal guidance system that we have within all of us. It's inherent within all of us.
So I get a sense that you have a lot of trust in that intuitive part of you that just sort of says yes to something that you see.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh yeah, and just paying more attention to what our intuition wants to speak to us. It's just like flexing a muscle, and most people just have not been listening. We're not taught to listen, so we're really just taught to communicate in very outwardly superficial ways. But there's many subtle levels of communication going on in every moment, really, that we can just literally focus our awareness on and just tune into just by placing our attention there.
Yeah, for me, we just did a high existence retreat a few weeks ago in Costa Rica, and I worked with ayahuasca, and one of the things that I learned was that I don't really trust my body. Like, I'm always trying to like outthink my body. I like trying to like monitor it, and almost like the rational part of me thinks it knows best. And it dawned on me that like this body that we have has such a deep intelligence, and we're actually stifling ourselves by trying to like think our way past our intuition and our emotions.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and just the component of trust is such a strong aspect of the visionary path, because really we're holding a vision in our mind that's beyond this 3D reality, right? So it's like we have to really have enough faith and trust that yes, we can actually anchor that vision into this reality. And there'll be tons of people around us being like, trying to doubt or say, oh, maybe that's not possible, or, but it's going beyond essentially this, what we believe to be true in this reality, and holding trust in a future that we know that we can call into our lives, and really, anchoring that vision into this reality takes a lot of commitment and a lot of trust.
Yeah, you said earlier that both of your parents were entrepreneurs. I was wondering, at what point in your life did you start going down the path of sort of healing and transformation and spirituality? Was there like a turning point?
Mm-hmm. When I was in my teenage years, I struggled with addiction and with depression. And I would say that psychedelics have helped me in a huge way. At first, when I was younger, it was a little bit more a method of either escapism or just recreational. But I'll never forget those first psilocybin journeys that I had. I mean, this was 20 years ago now. And I have been working deeply with plant medicines for the past 20 years. And those first journeys that I had were incredibly formative in my life, in terms of just having, I'll never forget this moment of just working with depression and then looking up in the sky at night while I was, working with psilocybin in that moment, and really perceiving the universe from a different perspective. And it just gave me perspective into my life that forever has changed me. And I've always had an intuitive sense that these medicines are really powerful for helping to heal addiction and depression, because they've helped me immensely in my own life. And now just watching, just the sheer magnitude of information and research that's coming out about that to support that now is really not only confirming, but just, really promising for hope and offering hope for other people, to receive help in those ways. So I would say, really was plant medicines that opened the door. But then when I was in my late teens, I started reading Wayne Dyer, was one of the first authors that I started to read in terms of his book, The Power of Intention and Real Magic and Your Sacred Self. Those were just the beginning. And I'm really grateful for a lot of the suffering that I went through, and that we all go through in our lives, because it was the crack, that let the light in, and it was the door, the opening for me to actually find a place of healing within myself. And so, yeah, I would say it was my path to spirituality really birthed through the darkest moments of my life, through depression, and through hopelessness and feeling like, why am I on this planet? This is a crazy time to be alive. And a lot of people are feeling that right now, but it's also the crisis that's the catalyst for the transformation that we're witnessing on the planet.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And you, am I right in saying that you work primarily with ayahuasca, or are there other plant medicines that you've also worked with?
Yeah, well, I love, psilocybin was my first plant teacher for almost the first 6 or 7 years that I worked with plant medicines and psychedelics. And then I moved into a more of an LSD phase for some years. And also, it's synthetic, but it was also very powerful teacher for me in my life. And through these years, actually, I was also working with microdosing intuitively. This was well before anyone was really even calling it microdosing, but it was an intuitive process that I noticed really helped me in my just navigating my daily reality. And then about 10 years ago, I met ayahuasca for the first time and really saw that all of the work I had done with other plant medicines and psychedelics had really brought me to her altar. And I really feel such a strong affinity for that plant medicine. She's taught me so much in my life, and really just, I feel like I have so much more to learn.
Is there any, like, do you still work with ayahuasca, like, in more recent times as well, over the last 10 years?
Oh yeah. I work with ayahuasca on a pretty regular basis. I also, and I just also, before we keep talking about psychedelics and plant medicines, I do want to just insert the disclaimer here that plant medicines are not for everyone, and to use a lot of discernment in this process, especially, they're becoming very popular and really entering the mainstream in such a huge way. And I think it's really important that people are aware that there are contraindications, especially to working with some of the stronger medicines like iboga and ayahuasca, and really knowing that there are medical contraindications for medications, for especially SSRIs and antidepressants. Just being really aware that just because you're hearing people talk about it, it doesn't necessarily make it for you, and to use a lot of that internal intuition of whether you're really feeling the call, and if you are feeling the call, making sure that it checks out in terms of being a good fit on a medical level.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. I wanted to ask you, are there any kind of tips that you have for approaching working with plant medicine now that you've been on this journey and you've worked with plant medicine for 20 years and you've done a lot of work with visionary practices, so when you go into work with the plant medicine now, are there any sort of things that you do beforehand to get the most like sort of teachings out of the experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. Like I do lots of coaching and I have training programs. So I'm running a retreat over New Year's in Costa Rica, and it's sort of like an advanced visionary training program, but it also includes 3 ceremonies. And so we talk a lot about this. I've really created a lot of content and information to offer people who want to go deeper in this way. But for people who are just starting and approaching this path, especially there's lots of tips around preparation, and also really understanding that the psychedelic journey itself is only a very small percentage of what the experience actually is. And that integration, I like to say, is like 98%, of what the experience is. And that we can have these huge epiphanies in our journeys, but that actually translating that wisdom into concrete changes that we're making into our everyday lives, it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes courage. The plant medicines can show us the path, but we have to be willing to take the first step and continue to walk the path. And so, this is really a huge conversation and a huge area that we could talk so much about. But slowing down, slowing down before the ceremony and taking time to start unplugging from social media, from other media, less in general, less consumption, less refined foods, less all of those extra things that we fill our lives with in terms of distractions and, media and all of that stuff. But just slowing down and actually starting to go from looking out to really looking in.
Right. And what about for the integration side of things? Are there any like common pitfalls that you've seen fall into, or?
Yeah. I mean, integration is also, it's so amazing that even 12 months ago, plant medicine integration was not being talked about at all. And so now there's a lot more support and education. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm creating a lot of content through my videos around tips for plant medicine integration. And I do think, one of the common pitfalls is this like ego amplification, where it's like ego inflation happens. We go to these places and we see just so much incredible, like the source of divinity, unity consciousness. And then we come out of these places and it's like, oh, well, I just had like an enlightened moment, but then it actually just like inflates our ego in some way. And I am noticing that there's like this sort of spiritual materialism that's happening, this like spiritual narcissism almost that's happening. And we have to all just really check ourselves on a regular basis, and know that I think one of the common misconceptions, especially from Western culture, is that like we're going to take this pill and it's going to fix us, that it's going to do the work for us. But I would say that that's a very harmful and false assumption to have going into these ceremonies where we actually have to do the heavy lifting. They're an aid and a catalyst for transformation, but we have to do the inner work. We have to be willing to choose to be kinder in the moment that it really counts, to choose to not be triggered in a moment that we've been habitually triggered in many times over. But in that moment, it's like we actually have to press pause, and stopping that momentum of habitual patterns, habitual ways of believing, perceiving, of thinking, of acting, to actually hit pause on that momentum is incredibly challenging. And it's a lifetime. It's a path, This is a path that we can walk every day for the rest of our lives, and be committed to this in a way that helps us see those gradual changes. And so, yes, these plant medicines can help catalyze that change and that transformation. We know the research shows that they help support neuroplasticity. They help us to change, but we have to be willing to actually make the new choice in the moment that it really matters the most.
Yeah, I think, wow, that's so important. And I think that message, I hope that so many people listen to that message, because spiritual narcissism or psychedelic narcissism, it's something that's been on my radar recently. I spoke to Jules Evans, and he's a philosophy writer, and he said that when he did ayahuasca, he heard the kind of like the medicine saying, all these amazing things about him, and he felt so special and so amazing, and like he was going to be the best writer ever. And then he realized, like, hang on a second, where's my humility here? Maybe I'm just sort of thinking about the things that I want to hear. And he said that later on, that if you're working with these kind of medicines or doing any kind of spiritual practice, and you're not becoming wiser and kinder as a result, then you're really just watching a movie. It's not really, like, that's the whole point, isn't it? To become kinder and wiser from this kind of work.
Which is why I think that this practice of working with psychedelics and plant medicines goes so hand in hand with Eastern philosophy. I don't know if you're familiar with Pema Chodron. She's been my primary sort of spiritual teacher. She's a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and her teachings are really incredible. And a lot of people ask me too, well, how do I stay connected to the medicine path on a daily basis? And one huge thing for me that's been so helpful in my own journey is that I listen to different Dharma talks that really resonate. And there's a lot of wisdom in these teachings. And when you said that about this other person on the path, it also makes me think that, like, the definition of a psychedelic comes from this word mind manifesting, and these psychedelics and these plant medicines are like non-specific amplifiers, and we already live in a very egoic culture, so it's like amplifying this experience of like, oh, you're going to be an amazing writer, or whatever that is. And then there's also the other flip side of it, of amplifying those that process of guilt or shame or blame. And mostly, I think what it's allowing us to do is come back into alignment and hold all of these pieces in a more cohesive way, because we're all full spectrum beings, and we're just living in an incredibly out of alignment in a time that's like very disconnected. So it's like a bit of a painful process, coming back to remembering our wholeness. But I do think on the whole that these plant medicines are helping us to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And I am a huge fan of Pema Chodron. I was wondering if you could recommend any books or Dharma talks, or any, like, where do you get these things from?
Oh, yeah. One amazing audio series that she has is Getting Unstuck. There's another one, Noble Heart. Oh my gosh, just totally. I mean, the path of the Bodhisattva is a path that I resonate with incredibly deeply. I talk a lot about that I have an email that goes out to the medicine tribe called Frequency First, and I say it's for the warriors of light, and a lot of that, the teachings of the Bodhisattva path come through in that, and there's so many. Gosh, going to the places that scare you. That's another just highly recommended book, From Fear to Fearlessness. I mean, there's so many, and wherever you want to start is a good place to start with her teaching. She's super accessible and relatable and down to earth.
I'll be sure to put all of the links you mentioned in the show notes for this podcast. Could you explain a little bit for our listeners what you mean by the Bodhisattva path?
Yeah, it's a path of cultivating the practice of bodhicitta, and so can be translated as enlightened heart and the awakened mind. And it's interesting because a lot of the teachings that I weave together are this weaving the ancient traditions and this ancient wisdom with science. And so this path of the bodhicitta, or the bodhisattva that cultivates this practice of bodhicitta, is also in alignment with this notion of what I call the biology of divine alignment, getting into a very coherent state between our mind and our heart. And in the West, we live very much so in our mind. And so the one of the most powerful journeys we can take is actually coming down and really embodying this state within our heart, a feeling state within our heart, and operating from the knowing that our heart is also a primary organ of perception. And so the path of the Bodhisattva is really for the compassionate warrior, people who are willing to hold space and face the darkness without shutting down, without constricting, without, looking away when you pass someone on the street and you see something that is just so painful to look at. It's in that moment staying open with an open heart and an open mind, that we can actually have compassion and love for the suffering of humanity, and hold that in a way that allows us to not constrict. Because the moment we shut down, the moment we see something painful, and there's a lot of pain and suffering going on in the world right now, and the moment we shut down, we actually create separation. And I truly believe that it's in this place of separation that all of the challenges and the problems we're facing on the planet stem from, this disconnection. So it's an advanced training ground, for people who are really seeing that we need to wake up right now, who feel this call, that we actually need to take the steps to wake up in our own heart and our own mind so that we can actually help this crisis that we're facing on the planet right now.
Yeah, wow, then this is very important stuff. I'm actually really motivated now to listen to some of these audios, so I'm excited about that. I want to get a sense of where you are right now in your life. So what are you passionate about? What are you working on? How are you spending your time at the moment?
That's a great question. Well, I am in a very short few days about to fly down to Peru for the first time. I've been working with ayahuasca in other parts of the world for about 10 years. And every time I've been tuning in with her, I've been like, gosh, should I just be going down and working with a teacher? Like, and every time I get the clear message, like, nope, you're exactly where you need to be. And so I'm finally just, after many years of working with this plant medicine, an alignment happened that felt really good. And also just wanting to illuminate the fact that we have to use a lot of discernment, especially when going down to Peru these days, because ayahuasca tourism is a thing. It's a very real thing. And so just been really tuning in with like where and who and how and the right alignment. And that alignment has finally happened. And so I'm going to be leaving in a few days. I'm going down to work with a grandmother down there for about a month. I'm going to go do a plant diet. And last year, the volcano erupted on the big island of Hawaii, and we were forced to evacuate our retreat center and our land. And so after the lava stopped, it flowed for about 3 months. We were in a position where we decided to sell the retreat center and just not have the stress of worrying. It was a very traumatic moment in time, the proverbial sort of rug being pulled out from under us. And I was working very deeply with ayahuasca at the time, right before, and she was starting to give me signs that major life change was happening. And so for the past couple of years, I've really been cultivating this body of knowledge around how to navigate these other dimensions of reality. And I've been really tapping into what I call quantum reality, what a lot of people are referring to quantum reality. And I'm doing that with the aid of my plant allies and learning how to actually tap into the field of infinite possibility. And it's been an amazing journey the past few years of really diving into understanding neuroscience and quantum physics and the biology of transformation, and really understanding what stemmed from that ceremony that I talked about, where that miracle happened. Like, what is the science of prayer? And is there other research that is showing that, prayer works, or that it's setting intentions? I know prayer is not such an accessible word for everyone. I've had a very big shift in my relationship to the word prayer since I started working with ayahuasca. But, does setting intention in that way affect matter? Can mind affect matter? And ayahuasca has been this advanced training ground for me to understand and to learn how to tap into other dimensions of reality and how to perceive reality differently. And so I've been cultivating this body of work, and then I knew that something drastic was about to happen, and then the volcano erupted, and ayahuasca was like, okay, it's time for you to be out in the world. And so right now I'm focusing on building my brand, I A Visionary, and, launching my YouTube channel. I'm also working on another project with a group of amazing people called Holos, where we're building a network of plant medicine centers and offering safe transformational experiences for people to journey with plant medicines for their first time. And then I also have been creating and have been working on this a little bit more of it like an advanced retreat training ground, where people are really diving into visionary teachings that include plant medicines as a really comprehensive program to really upgrade and up-level your life and to let go of all of these beliefs that don't serve us anymore. And so that's really what I've been focusing on, and building my speaking career, and just meeting amazing people along the way, and traveling a lot these days, and going deeper in the inward journey as well.
With the advanced visionary program that you have, what is that? Would someone come to meet you? Is it like a retreat or online?
Yes. So the next one we have is over New Year's in Costa Rica. It's 11 days and 10 nights. And it's a pretty comprehensive program where we're not just working with, teaching, where it's workshops and talks. There is that, but it's also very experiential. So in that process, we do a lot of integration practices, and we also have a program in the morning. So I teach people how to work with ayahuasca, just Banisteriopsis caapi, as a microdose, as a very effective tool for integration and transformation and tapping into the channel of inspiration. So a lot of people frame it as, tapping into flow. I like to think of it as really cultivating this open channel of inspiration in our lives to allow, whatever wants to come through us and out into the world. And so I have a pretty amazing program in the morning. It's in my morning routine that I teach other people. It's working with microdosing and also working with some high intensity workout and dance and yoga and breath work and cold plunges. Cold showers is a big component of that. I'm a huge fan of Wim Hof, and then going into very deep meditation practice. And so that's like the foundation. And then we build on that with course material and workshops and talks. And then, of course, the ceremonies is a big part of that, and as well as integration.
Sounds amazing. Yeah. And I love the fact that it's so comprehensive, because you don't, with such deep work, I do sometimes worry that people leave these retreats that they go on without like the adequate tools and ideas to really integrate and ground themselves afterwards. So I like that you offer that.
Yeah, and from the perspective of actually, like, when we work with these plant medicines, we're just opening up so much energy. I don't know if you've had that experience working with ayahuasca, but we're really tapping into, we're like lifting the veil between this solid reality and the spirit realm, and there's much more fluidity. And when we start entering these other dimensions of reality, and here, maybe I could actually give you like a concrete example, because when people hear me say sometimes other dimensions of reality, it's hard for people to understand, like, what are you even talking about? So this is a good sort of concrete example. Do you remember those images? They were called stereographs, but they were also called magic eyes. Do you remember those magic eye paintings? And I remember the first time I looked at one, they used to be really popular. They were like those 3D images that, and I remember the first time I was like looking at one, and I couldn't really, it was just like just blobs of, chaotic pattern on a paper. And there was someone standing next to me saying, soften your gaze, look at it from this way. I can see it, and they were telling me that they could see it. So I was like believing that it was possible. And then there was this moment where it jumped out at me, and there was like, oh, there was another dimension of reality that was in front of me all the time, but I couldn't see it until someone was like pointing to it and being like, hey, look at it from this perspective. What if we like give you this concept or this conceptual framework for you to, from which to perceive from? And then the moment that I was able to perceive it, it's like, Jeremy Narby, he's an amazing author. He talks about ayahuasca. He says, once you see, you can't unsee. And so it's kind of like that kind of training where we're really talking about how do we perceive other dimensions of reality, and what does that mean to live our lives from within this perspective that there's actually so much more to reality than this solid 3D reality that we perceive with our senses. And that's what quantum physics points to, is that actually on a subatomic level, when we look at the basic building blocks of all matter, it's actually mostly empty space. It's 99.99999% empty space. What, not empty, it's, a lot of energy, but it's not solid matter. But we spend our whole lives focusing on that 0.00001% of matter. Is there more that we can be perceiving here? And how do we shift our awareness to actually perceive this huge amount of other, the 99.999% of reality that does exist that we're not tuning into? And then what does that mean for our lives?
I really, really, really like the analogy with the magic eyes. That is so cool. And I actually think maybe enlightenment might work similarly, because if you listen to many Buddhist monks, they will often say like enlightenment is right here for you. It's nothing to be achieved. It's always here. And listening to that, you're like, what? I'm not enlightened, and I don't know what you mean, but it's exactly the same as the magic eyes. It's just a change in perspective, and when you have that change, you can't go back.
And there's such a strong, it just totally makes me think of that aligning versus trying. There's such a strong momentum in our culture to like go after, and yes, it's a balance. We have to let things happen and we have to make things happen, but we're just in such chronic doing mode of like making it happen, striving, trying, like grasping. But it's like Buddha nature, it's everyone has Buddha nature within themselves. Awakened mind is a fundamental quality of our mind, and it's really about perceiving it in that way. And most of us just don't have that connection to that, Buddha nature within us.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about from talking with you, something I've noticed is I sometimes see this with people who are interested in spirituality and the plant medicine path. There seems often to be like there's a disconnect between this path and kind of like an industriousness, or kind of a conscientiousness, a kind of a productivity. So I'll often meet people who want to meditate and take cold showers and read spiritual books, but then they don't really want to work hard at something and achieve something. It's almost like that takes them out of that nice tranquil state. But obviously you've managed to get that balance between achieving things, making things happen, manifesting your visions, and also following the path. So how do you think you've managed to combine those two things, being very productive and also following the spiritual path?
I think for me, it's a balance of inward time and outward time. And I notice, like, if I'm traveling a lot or having lots of meetings or speaking engagements, if I'm too outwardly focused, it's out of balance. And most people just don't have a practice of inner exploration. And for me, that's where creation stems from. Everything in this 3D reality stems from the spirit realm, stems from quantum reality. It's the place of, the power of intention, for example, that Wayne Dyer talks about. But it's the same thing with our reality that we create with our own lives. Everything for me in terms of my creation stems from the inner realm of my consciousness. It's it's my anchoring point into what I'm creating with my life. And so it's just sort of a reflection or a marker of like what I perceive as to be. It's like a path of mastery, really, of creating our own lives. And it's incredibly challenging to do when we live in an environment that's so outward focused all the time. But for me at this point, it's actually just painful. It's painful for me to be too outwardly focused without anchoring back into the inner realms of my consciousness, because there's an entire incredible universe to explore within ourselves. And so it's really, for me, about that balance of anchoring my days through the practice of meditation. And it's easier said than done, for a lot of people who are so caught in the rat race and the trap of needing to, be productive and output and do all of these things. And so do I. I have a lot on my plate as well, but it's essential to balance that with the inward journey.
And do you though find yourself like I don't know what word to use, like hustling, like grinding, getting into like not sleeping much and doing a lot of deep work? Or would you say that would be out of balance for you?
You mean like overworking?
Yeah, like do you ever overwork, or
Oh
like
yeah.
what I mean? Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And but I'm pretty good at like catching myself and coming back. But the thing with my kind of work is that everything that I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and so everything that I'm creating is also really fun for me to create, and I really try to come back to that perspective that I'm like shooting videos and getting to like make what I want to make in this reality. And so, and same thing with the retreat center. And of course, like we were building this amazing place, and then we were starting to feel some level of burnout, of just really working too hard. And it's just a constant process of discernment of energy and where we're putting our energy, and how we're feeling in the process. And this culture that we live in, it's like a really strong illusion that is very convincing. And it's like, this constant chronic pattern of like needing to be productive. And it really takes like this sort of advanced Jedi training to like navigate through that and to actually really listen to our internal guidance system of what makes sense for us in our lives. And so, and then it's interesting to hear you say that too, because I'm also noticing like the total opposite extreme of what you described, where I feel like a lot of people are using these practices to like produce more. It's like peak performance, and like how do I like catalyze all of these experiences so that I can like produce more. And I also notice that like I've had more of that tendency, and just like, again, so much of it comes back down to this differing frequency between trying and just aligning. And like the process of my meditation process, for example, is where I'm like really dropping back into my center. And it's actually like a somatic experience where I'm not like even leaning forward trying to make something happen, but I'm really just aligning and embodying what I want to create in this reality right here and right now. And I think it's really good to frame a lot of this, like, because I do talk about peak performance as well. And I like to frame it differently for people, that it's really about tapping into the channel of feeling inspired and creating from a joyous place, like creating with a purpose. And I think the more people on this planet who are resonating at that frequency and holding that vision for their lives and really anchoring an inner vision that's of the frequency of inspired creation and creating with a purpose, that that it's only going to be better for our planet when people are creating from that place.
One of the things that I admire about you is that sometimes you can be an entrepreneur, and what that means is that you just find ways to make money. It doesn't matter how, you just find ways to make money. But it seems like you're an entrepreneur and you work on things that you really care about, that you find meaningful, which is so cool.
And that's
the
possible.
true definition of entrepreneur. It's possible, right? Do you think that entrepreneurs are born, or do you think that someone could kind of like learn to tap into that?
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely. I mean, a lot of the coaching that I do, right, is just the basis of it is exploring what limiting beliefs we have about what's possible. Because it's again coming back from that neuroscience perspective. We're given these concepts, these conceptual frameworks as children that become deeply ingrained beliefs around what we believe is possible, and so we need to form new neural connections in our mind that really become the blueprint for what we want to create in reality. And so, yeah, I think anything can be learned. And I would say that even looking at, being an entrepreneur my whole life, even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, people thought I was way crazier than I am now, because like now everyone is like, there's so much more social acceptance for people, quote unquote, leaving the cubicle and making it on their own. And it's a huge leap of faith to do that, and people are having more courage than ever before. I'm watching the entrepreneurial market, so to speak, become much more more saturated than ever before. And so I think that there is this waking up process where people aren't wanting to settle for the status quo anymore. And that creates like a collective up leveling where, when of course we see all these other people around us doing it, that just keeps, mirror reflection of a belief within us that, oh, it's possible for me too. If everyone else is doing it, it's possible that I can do it too.
Yeah, I like that. Getting rid of limiting beliefs. I sometimes catch myself with a limiting belief. It's sometimes difficult to see your own limiting beliefs, and you need coaching or someone else to kind of point that out to you. So I think that this is actually a really good time to wrap things up. I could easily keep talking to you, and I feel like we've covered so much already in just an hour. I would love to actually talk to you again in the future when you've come back from this other chapter, and just find out how things have gone for you. But where could people find out more about, like, what is your YouTube channel, what is your website, etc., etc.?
Yeah, all my social media, I'm primarily on Instagram and now getting started on YouTube. I go by Live Free Laura D on Instagram and YouTube, and I have my website ayavisionary.com, as well as my other website livefreelaurad.com. And you can find my email address and connect with me on social media through all of those outlets.
Wonderful. I'll provide links as well in the show notes to this episode. So yeah, thank you, Laura. I really appreciate your time, and I've learned a lot, and I'm gonna really rethink how I'm approaching life. And I think I might actually look into maybe coming on one of the retreats that you run in the future.
Oh, that would be great. We'd love to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the High Existence podcast. Remember, if you enjoyed listening to this, subscribe so that you get notified when all new episodes come out. And if you really like it, then we would appreciate it so much if you left a review and a comment on the podcast. It would help us keep the podcast going strong and would allow us to keep getting amazing guests on the show. Until next time, my friends.